Alright, so we're looking at the data from the start in quotations of the COVID pandemic. This is on October 1st, 2020. So we were given plotted points where what looked like what was going to be some sort of curve of cases. I have two graphs I made for this. First one is this right here. You got y equals 2, this is exponential graph firstly, and this is y equals 2 to the power of 1 over 9.5 times x plus 40 plus 10. Other graph I had was this one here, sine graph. This is y equals 400 sine 1 over 25 times x minus 40 plus 500. Firstly, I chose these two functions mainly because when I first saw this little curve here, looked like there's some sort of asymptote line in here, but y equals 100. So my initial reaction was, oh, maybe there's an asymptote there that can't go below. Obviously, if we look at the cases, we know that it has to start with one person, so we know that there truly isn't an asymptote there. But for what we have here, this is what I've seen on this graph with the points we were given. That is why my conclusion was that there is an asymptote here. Then I just tried to find things that sort of match this curve. What I saw here could either be some sort of, looked like a bottom of like half a hyperbola, half of a parabola, also looked like an exponential, and as I said, a sine graph as well. Reason I went with a sine graph over here was because this looks like it was tapering off. Looked like it was tapering off a little, so that's why I went with that. I do believe that this is the correct graph, though the proportions are wrong. I do believe that there will be a peak somewhere and the number of cases will go down. Obviously, we know that this is true, right? This down here, this is not gonna, obviously, firstly, we're gonna talk about the size of this graph here. It's completely wrong. Firstly, day-wise, we're not gonna be dropping in our cases in just 130 days. Realistically, that's not just not gonna happen. Other thing, amount of people infected, looks like it tops out at around 900. Also, not gonna happen. This is more in years. This is more in maybe hundreds of thousands, maybe if not millions of people, right? So the proportions of this graph are wrong. But the fundamental idea of this being a sine graph and thinking this is one cycle, that's more likely compared to what we see with this here, right? Hopefully this just doesn't happen. Hopefully we're not, exponentially increasing the amount of cases we have day by day, because that would just be horrible for the human population, first of all, but that would also just be a bad representation, because normally that's not going to happen, right? Exponentially, it's just not going to grow. There's going to be some sort of natural resistance out there, right? And as we've seen with vaccinations, with masks, with quarantining, with social distancing, we slowly saw the numbers starting to decrease, which is a good thing, right? Another thing with this is, it looks like, oh, it's going to come down and it's going to stop and eventually bottom out at 0 cases. Personally, I don't feel that's accurate, and the reason for that is because what we've seen is that the number of cases will ebb and flow with how loose or how tight restrictions are kept, right? We keep tight during crazy quarantine, all tight, no one's allowed to go anywhere, and all of a sudden we start to see this taper off, right? And then it starts to taper off, people start to get a little loose, they start to relax a little, maybe not wear their mask out as much, maybe get a little closer, people start meeting up more, and as we saw that near the end of the year, right, people started to, not take it so seriously, right? And at that point, cases started to increase again. So we're going to be seeing multiple waves, probably not as high, but in general, it's going to be multiple waves of this. Even right now, the amount of COVID cases is probably some sort of sine wave for sure, but definitely just not in one cycle, right? And I am pretty confident in these predictions because, as we know, we're no longer in lockdown. We are no longer in a global pandemic, right? Sure, there are cases here and there of COVID, but it's just not as prevalent anymore, which is a very good thing for us, right? We're going back to school in person. People are going back to work full-time in person as well, so also a good thing. Recommend measure in future. As I said, the government most likely has, actually the government does, or they had graphs up on the number of COVID cases. They have in the past. I don't know if those are up anymore, but though those graphs existed and we could see the curve happening, right? There were all these commercials about, flattening the curve, lowering the curve, and that is just that flattening is giving reference to sort of shortening this peak here, where, you know, the amount of people at max that get infected will be lower. So, you know, this is why I feel that this sign graph here is an accurate representation of what will happen, what the trend looks like. Obviously not in these proportions, but this is a accurate representation, in my opinion.